I'm delighted this morning to welcome back to the Living Opera microphone the distinguished American soprano, star of the Metropolitan Opera houses throughout the world, Miss Phyllis Curtin. Miss Curtin, welcome back.
Thank you.
A very amusing incident, at least to me, happened to you in Detroit just recently when you were thrust at the last moment into a performance. Would you
Well,
tell
I'm
us
glad
something
it
about
was
that?
amusing to you.
Yes, I know it wasn't to you.
Well, it certainly was the last moment. I had been singing the night before in Provo, Utah, with the Philadelphia Orchestra. I, of course, after all, am a cover for Salome. I was on the tour, so it wasn't that I hadn't thought of this opera for a while. I, as a matter of fact, spent for the trip from Salt Lake to Chicago reading the score, just in case of disaster. By the time I got to Detroit, however, and checked into the hotel, it was 6 o'clock in the evening. And curiously, I got into the elevator, and there was Brenda Lewis, who was scheduled to sing it, on her way to the theater. And she looked somewhat relieved that I was there. She hadn't been feeling at all well, and I didn't think she looked very well, but she was on her way to the theater, and we shook hands and gave one another a friendly kiss, and she said, "Don't worry, everything's fine." So I went into the hotel dining room to have dinner and ordered rather a large one since the airplane food had not been particularly engaging that day. And I must say that the hotel did no better, and I just toyed with my dinner. When I got upstairs at almost 7 o'clock, the phone was ringing, and there they were at the Opera House saying, "Come right down, Brenda's not at all well." So I got to the Opera House a little after 7 and was on the stage a few minutes after 8. And you know, Salome's over in no time at all. It was really kind of an interesting evening in many ways. I really was prepared. I had sung it most recently in December in Vienna, incidentally with Regina Resnick as Herodias. We kind of felt it was a nice New York evening in Vienna. And my little refreshment as far as study was concerned on the airplane had been useful. I felt really very happy that evening. I had not seen the Metropolitan production, but Salome is really a rather fascinating opera. If you're going to have to jump in, at least you can jump in with fewer qualms, at least as far as the stage is concerned, than you can with most operas. Salome, after all, is a pretty independent agent on the stage in anybody's mise en scène, and so I was not particularly concerned with that. I was concerned with the fact that on tour, particularly since most theaters are not equipped with trapdoors, the cistern, instead of being, you see, a hole in the stage, was a huge thing, about 10 very steep steps up in the air, so that, of course, a man the size of a Walter Castle can be in there without having to squinch on his hands and knees. So getting up and down that cistern presented its problems, but really I had a delightful evening. I was quite pleased.
Well, judging from reports we got back here in New York, it was quite a triumphant evening for you, and I wish you
It was exciting.
I offer you my congratulations on it. This is quite a change from your debut role, Fiordaligi, in Così fan tutte. That represents quite a wide, expansive repertoire, doesn't it?
Well, I'd say it represents just about as wide a one as you can get as a soprano. However, it's curious that in my career I seem always to have these things coming cheek by jowl. In Vienna in the winter, I had them one day apart. And just now in Detroit, I had, I think, the Salome on Tuesday and a Saturday matinee of Così. Of course, that's plenty of time in between. However, this is, after all, a change of mind. If you trust your vocal technique, then the difference in these things is really one of imagination. It's exactly the same thing, actually, in speech. Your excited voice in anger is quite a different thing from your excited voice, let's say, in amusement or at a football game. These are changes of emotion, you see, reacting on the voice, so that the color changes that way. One mustn't do things differently.
It just arises naturally.
It should arise,
emotional,
yes, if the vocal technique is free enough, you see, then the change in emotion, in attitude, in the character will make its mark in the right way on the sound.
Do you find any difficulty in writing over the Straussian orchestra at all?
Well, yes, of course, one has to be philosophical about the Straussian orchestra. There is really no point, to my mind, in battling Strauss orchestra. After all, we have 2 vocal cords, and that's it, and there are never going to be any more. There are going to be many evenings in the theater when, depending on the acoustics of the theater, depending on the quality of the orchestra, depending on the temper of the conductor, when the singer really has very little chance. In this case, I, as I say, tend to be philosophical about it. If I can be heard, all well and good. If I'm going to be swallowed up in it, the amount of steam that I add, perhaps, or volume, is not really going to matter, you see. So I do the best singing I can. I do the most focused singing I can, and in many ways I would say the purest singing I can, so that I'm sure that everything is going out in tone.
I see.
And God willing, and all other things being in the best way, I'll be heard.
Well, we mentioned two operas that are within the Viennese tradition, so to speak. What about some of the operas in the more romantic tradition of the French and Italian repertoires? Do you sing many French and Italian roles?
Yes. In the French repertoire, of course, it's somewhat more limited anyway. I sing Massenet's Manon, which I'm very fond of. I've sung that chiefly in Buenos Aires. I sing Pelléas and Mélisande. In the Italian repertoire, I really do a great deal that I haven't done so much of in New York as I have in Europe. But this includes Traviata and Butterfly and many others.
You just recently sang at Scala in Milan, didn't you?
Yes, but there again, Così fan tutte.
Così fan tutte. This opera kind of haunts you, doesn't it?
Yes, it kind of haunts me. She takes me everywhere, this Fiordiligi.
Well, as a matter of fact, I remember doing it on television as a
yes.
Praise be, so many years ago.
Yes. I've done many different productions of Così fan tutte. I must say that for me, it's the most constantly rewarding of the Mozart operas. I've sung it surely over 100 times. I've never, not even in a rehearsal of it, ever been bored, either by the people or by the music.
It's a fantastic work.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely fantastic. You mentioned the fact that you sing, that the French repertoire is rather limited. This is a fact that I decry. I'm getting rather fond of many French operas that I'm hearing for the first time. Are there any you'd like to see revived for you?
It's curious you say revived for me. No, but I think it would be lots of fun to sing Louise. I can't think.
That's an opera I adore. That's an opera I adore, and that's one particularly that I'd love to see.
Yes, in this coming season, there's a group, Friends of French Opera, I believe they're to be called, who are doing excerpts from various French operas. I shall be involved in that performance, singing a long excerpt from Ducas's Ariane à Barbe Bleue, also the last act of Huguenots. There are lots of things lurking around. Yes, in French.
It's being done at La Scala, I think, but as
yes.
Guinotti, isn't it? I think it's being done in Italian.
I dare say.
I'm sure it is. You made a very fine reputation, among other things, as being a superb interpreter of modern music, particularly modern American music. This, I think, also attests to your versatility. Do you find that many of our modern composers are composing at all well for the voice?
Yes, I think so. This is, after all, composing for the voices is not as easy a trick, I don't think, as very often casually we tend to think of it. After all, the Italian masterpieces or the Mozartian ones are hardly easy for the voice. They're not always all that simple, but we're very used to them, don't you see? We've heard this kind of pattern for so long that we lend ourselves easily to it. In the operas, for instance, of Carlisle Floyd, and I'm doing a new one this fall.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
In Susanna, there are some really big vocal problems to be solved, but I can only say that that's certainly true of Fiordiligi. Look at that range,
yes.
For instance, from the low F, yes, to the high Cs. These things are not at all simple. I think that often, because we are not so used to the idiom of a contemporary composer, after all, whom we are hearing only as he develops, we tend to think these things are more difficult, possibly, than they are.
I mentioned the fact that you sang Così fan tutte on a television performance, and just recently you were in La Moire de Tre Re on television. Does performing opera on television have particular demands as opposed to performing an opera on stage? Is it more or less difficult?
As it's been done in my experience, it poses some problems which ultimately are musical, though while you're doing them they're really extra musical. For instance, usually, in my experience always, the orchestra has been in another studio. This means that one's musical preparation before has to be very tight In other words, there must not be tremendous leeway between the singer and the conductor. We must really have agreed. He must know that I'm not going to just hang on to this note forever. After all, he has to hear me through earphones at the same time that he's trying to hear his orchestra. This is really a difficult problem in coordination for the conductor. For the singer, we must go by what we hear rebroadcast in the studio. Sometimes, wherever you are in the set makes this difficult. You know you're hearing it not great big loud sound. You can't because of the other things that are going on and the danger of rebroadcasting, you see.
Rebroadcast of the rebroadcast.
And the only hope you have of being in contact with the conductor is through various monitors. But you there again can't be stopping to look at yourself on the screen, hoping at the same time to see another monitor where there's a conductor. So this kind of musical problem is difficult. It, of course, has certain inherent dangers, namely a certain inflexibility musically or perhaps a certain stodginess musically can be the result. I think that NBC has been remarkably good in getting quite lively musical performances under these circumstances. The other thing, of course, is the proximity of the camera. One hates to be thinking of her face while singing, though it is true that for people who are used to singing in big halls, there's a certain physical effort involved. The camera, meanwhile, working on a close-up, can record tiny changes in one's facial muscles, even just as you change your mind, that because of lighting and the medium itself are almost magnified. So that the physical effort of singing has got to somehow be put into a more carefully guarded box, as it were.
That, I imagine, creates...
So that physically it's an entirely different acting problem.
You have to mask certain things.
One can't be doing big gestures and big, strong facial things that, after all, we hope are carrying in opera houses when the camera is taking you from the shoulders up.
Somebody once told me that one of the reasons Spencer Tracy is a great actor is that he acts between the bridge of the nose and the top of the eyebrows, and that's about all.
That may be.
And he may have something there. I heard you mention this before, the three kings in L'Amore di Tre Re. Who are the three kings?
Well, I don't know who they are. I never discovered it. We always refer to the old man, Archibaldo, as the old baron. His son Manfredo, who's married to Fiora, is the Baron Manfredo. Avito, the lover of Fiora, is called the Prince of Altura.
So there's two barons.
So
and a
I
prince.
don't know where those kings
Lots of luck
are.
with your title. That's what.
Yes, but it's a lovely title.
Okay, well, yes, it is. It's a very musical title. What about your plans now, Miss Curtin? Where are you going now at the early part of the summer?
Well, I'm leaving shortly for Cincinnati, where I do Traviatas and Salomes again. Then July is full of festival things. A Viennese night in Hollywood Bowl, 2 concerts at Grant Park, a Requiem, Mozart Requiem at Tanglewood, more Salome in Lewiston Stadium. Then August is a month happily without performance, but during August and September I have 2 new operas to learn, the first being Intermezzo of Richard Strauss, which is going to be lots of fun. I'm glad to hear you say you love it. I'm really not terribly acquainted with this opera as yet. I've never heard it. And then Carlisle Floyd has a new opera which will have its premiere at the City Center, and I intend to do it there along with Theodore Upman. We're singing this opera, which is entitled The Passion of Jonathan Wade. It's a story set in the immediate Reconstruction period in Columbia, South Carolina. I find the libretto extraordinarily exciting and have not heard any except just fragments of the music yet, but I expect it to be a very interesting opera.
Going back to Europe next year at all, do you think?
Yes, in the spring.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing you here in New York. Thank you very much, Miss Curtin, for taking the time to join me.
I've enjoyed it.